Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at solving inequalities. So we're going to look at both inequalities and equalities because you've already done equalities before. So if we have something like 3x plus 5 is equal to, I don't know, 10, and then we're going to look at something like 3x plus 5 is greater than 10. Okay? The one on the left here is an equality because it has the equal symbol. The one on the right is an inequality because it has an inequality symbol. And remember, the inequality symbols are greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. So one of these four makes it an inequality, and the equal symbol makes it an equality. So when we have an equality, this is a two-step equation. We're going to look for the variable. Right here is the variable. If it's in more than one spot, you have to get them together. And we're going to just move everything away from the x. So generally we do the plus or minus first, and then we'll deal with the multiply and divide second. So to get rid of this plus 5, we're going to subtract 5. And we do it to both sides. And you get 3x on the left, because 5 minus 5 is 0. On the right, you're going to get 5, because 10 minus 5 is 5. Then the next thing, we're going to divide both sides by 3. And we get x is equal to, in this case, 5/3. And sometimes it's a fraction, that's fine. Now, on the right, we have an inequality. But the thing about the inequality is you treat it just like an equality. So we're going to do exactly the same steps. So we're first going to subtract 5. And if we do it on one side, we do it to the other. Now, when we said that originally, we were talking about the equal sign. This time, we're saying we're going to do it on both sides of the inequality sign. So when we say both sides, we're talking about the inequality sign here. So we'll subtract 5 from the other side. 5 minus 5 is still 0, so I'm left with a 3x. The greater than sign stays the same, and you get 10 minus 5 is 5. And we're going to divide both sides by 3. So we get x is greater than 5/3. And that is your answer. So it's very similar to the original one. The only difference is instead of an equal sign, we have an inequality sign. In most of the cases, you're going to solve it exactly the same way. There is one exception, and it's this. If you multiply or divide by a negative. Okay? If you multiply or divide by a negative, you're going to take the symbol and you're going to switch it around. So instead of being a greater than, it becomes a less than. Instead of being a less than, it becomes a greater than. You're going to just switch it around. And we've always done that. The thing is, with an equal sign, when you flip it around, it still looks like an equal sign. So we never even talk about it. But anytime you multiply or divide by a negative, you're going to switch that symbol around. So let's look at a couple cases. If you have something like negative 2x is less than 5. Here you're going to divide both sides by negative 2 to solve it. You get x is less than negative 5/2. But because you divided here by a negative, we're going to take that inequality symbol, in this case it was a less than, and we're going to get rid of it, and we're going to switch it around and make it a greater than symbol. Okay, so that's what I mean by switching it around. So anytime you multiply or divide by a negative, you're going to switch it around. Okay, so let's look at a case for divide. Let's say I have x divided by negative 3 is greater than or equal to 5. Okay, in this case, we're dividing by negative 3. We want to undo that. You undo it by multiplying by negative 3. If you do it on one side, you got to do it to the other side. And when you multiply by a negative, you are going to switch the sign around. So on the left, we get x. Switching the sign around, you get a less than or equal to. And 5 times negative 3 is negative 15. So just like before, because we multiplied by a negative to both sides, we switch the symbol around. So our answer would be x is less than or equal to negative 15. So as you can tell, the less than the greater than signs switch around, as do the greater than and or equal to and the less than or equal to signs. Now there's a couple cases I wanted to show you that sometimes we run into that aren't necessarily the same, and that's something like this. If you have, let's say, 2x is less than negative 8, and you divide. You're going to divide both sides by 2, and you get x, and then over here you're going to get negative 4, and two things come up. First thing is sometimes people look at this negative and say, hey, oh, it's negative, you're dividing, you're going to switch the symbol around. Sometimes people look at the answer and say, oh, the answer is negative, and we divided, therefore we're going to switch the symbol around. Neither of those matters. What matters is what did you divide by. In this case, we divided by positive 2. Since you divided by positive 2, the symbol stays the same. It's only when you're dividing by a negative or multiplying by a negative that you switch that symbol. And here's what the multiply case looks like. So you have x over 4 is greater than negative 3. You're going to multiply here both sides by 4. and you get x, and then you're going to keep that greater than sign, and you get negative 12. So again, doesn't matter that it was negative here, doesn't matter that the answer is negative. What matters is what did you multiply both sides by, and we multiplied both sides by 4, so you get x is greater than negative 12. Alright, so if you have any questions, go ahead and make sure you ask, but this is how you multiply or divide inequalities, or excuse me, this is how you solve inequalities, and the only difference is when you multiply or divide by a negative. Otherwise, you treat it exactly the same way.